What's going on, guys? This is DaWoblefet, and I'm here with round 3 of the Swiss rounds for the Players' Cup 4 in North America. In this round 3, I am playing against Kyle Foley, and I don't have very good notes on what their online screen name was. I can't even read my own handwriting, unfortunately, for the notes I took. I probably will have it right in the YouTube title, so that's a good thing at least, but my opponent is named Kyle, no matter how their username is pronounced or spelled. And they've got a interesting Venucle team. So it has Regirock on there. I've definitely seen some of those Regirock like Grimmsnarl variants running around. But typically they have a Trick Room component to them, especially with Torkoal. This one doesn't have that. It's Trick Room-less, which is pretty unusual. Also unusual is the Thundurus being a Safety Goggles Therian Thundurus, which is kind of cool. Therian Thundurus will wall my Regieleki completely, so I have to be careful about that, but it's generally not great against the rest of my team, so that's a pretty good advantage that I've got there. The Venusaur is Giga Drain and Weather Ball, which is also interesting. It makes me very not inclined to want to bring my Registeel. Registeel doesn't look particularly good in this matchup. And they got a Finny, which is annoying to try to match versus. It's good versus the Regirock, but against everything else, it just doesn't really seem to fit. Versus these sorts of teams, I typically like to bring my Spectrier. Spectrier is very good as a lead. I'm able to Snarl or Taunt the Venusaur. And a lot of the Sun teams that I was practicing against, or that I was facing in practice, I should say, kind of folded to Spectrier lead. They couldn't really stop me from going from Snarl and Taunts, and that really bothered them. Grimmsnarl also isn't a huge threat. It's got Scary Face. It doesn't have Taunt or another move that can pressure my Spectrier, so my Spectrier is looking really nice. The only thing that can outspeed it is Venusaur, and it gets a Snarl off versus everything, or a Will-O-Wisp, so that's looking pretty strong. Landorus also looks like a great max option here. That's typically why I like to bring the max versus Sun. It's able to do heavy damage to the Venusaur. This Venusaur is Focus Sash, but it's kind of like Koba. They can just survive one hit, and that's what you need to worry about. It's usually a little bit easier to fight against Sash because you can break Sash a little bit more easily with something like a Snarl. So I decided to go ahead and lock in my Spectrier and Aleki with Lando and Clefairy in the back. Again, this seems like a kind of a stat drop my opponent. And after they are unable to do a lot of damage to me, I can send in my Landorus and gain the speed advantage with max Airstreams and just try to blow through the rest of their team. So that was my game plan going into this. My opponent leads with Regirock and Grimmsnarl, and that's fine with me. I really want to Will-O-Wisp this Regirock. Regirock typically likes to Dynamax. They don't have any way of self-procking their Dynamax, at least not very easily. The Tapu Fini can go for Brine, and the Venusaur can go for like Earth Power, but that's about the best way they can trigger the Regirock's weakness policy themselves. So I expect here probably what they're going to do is switch into their Tapu Fini somewhere to block the Will-O-Wisp. And so I'm going to use Thunderbolt here on the Grimmsnarl instead of Volt switching. I just want to cover the Tapu Fini switching in. My opponent wisely just goes for the Protect and Light Screen. That was a really smart play from them. Really hard for me to punish that. I'm very inclined to want to go for the Will-O-Wisp into the Regirock there. And so I'm only going to get just Thunderbolt damage on this Grimmsnarl. However, this still isn't so bad for me. I still have the ability to Thunderbolt the Tapu Fini as it switches in, which is really nice. And also, I'm pretty sure, so my opponent is going to do one of two plays. They're either going to switch out their Regirock into Tapu Fini, or they're going to switch out their Grimmsnarl into Tapu Fini, because they really can't afford to get burned, because it seems like they want to Dynamax this, given that they led with it the way that they did. So I'm happy here just double the Grimmsnarl. If that switches into Tapu Fini, I will likely knock it out, and if Grimmsnarl stays in, I will knock it out as well. So it's a pretty win-win for me. If they go for Scary Face, that won't impact the speed order here, unless the Regirock is pretty fast. The Regirock does switch out, and that's into Tapu Fini. So found the Tapu Fini, didn't get the right slot though. If I had doubled that slot with Thunderbolt and Shadow Ball, that would have been a lot better than just hitting the Grimmsnarl. But still, it's not too bad. I'm going to be able to get a knockout on the Grimmsnarl, get a +1 on my Spectrier, and that'll make it a lot more threatening. Its Snarls will do ever so slightly more damage, things of that nature. So Shadow Ball takes out the Grimmsnarl. And now I'm in a really nice spot. If my opponent, since they had Tapu Fini in the back, that means they can't have both Torkoal and Venusaur, which is very nice. And so I expect, okay, maybe they've got Thundurus in the back. Thundurus in the back could make some sense here. They do go into their Regirock again. At this point, I've also already calced. My opponent cannot knock out my Spectrier with any attack. Max Rockfall based on Rock Slide will not knock out Spectrier, and the sand damage won't affect it because of safety goggles. So I will survive the attack. So going for Max Electric there into Tapu Fini, I'm either going to do a lot of damage to Tapu Fini, or it's going to switch into Thundurus, which would be pretty annoying if it switches into Thundurus. I would waste my turn there. But because I'm Dynamaxing as well, there's no way that either of my Pokemon can go down this turn. With the Dynamax, I'm definitely not going to go down to a Max Quake. That's not a stab attack. It doesn't have any boosting item on the Regirock, so I end up getting a great turn for me. My opponent decides to stay in, so I'm like, okay, perfect. That's probably going to be like a Protect on Tapu Fini, scouting or covering for the Thunderbolt option. I like the potential double target with the Thunderbolt and Shadow Ball, because that I'm pretty sure should kill even through Light Screen. But yeah, a Max is really nice here because it lets me put the Will-O-Wisp on Regirock anyway, and in order to cover that, they'd have to switch out their Regirock they'd have to switch out their Tapu Fini into Thundurus. And that wouldn't be like necessarily that great for them either, so yeah, anyway, I get this turn right. I get a Max Electric off into the Tapu Fini, and so now I can Will-O-Wisp the Regirock and greatly reduce its damage. The Max Rock from Regirock is going to do about like 75 to Spectrier without Max, or without Will-O-Wisp. And yeah, I actually missed this one, so that's not good either. And they go for Quake, I'm like, ah, great, my Lucky's going to take a lot of damage for that. That's really annoying. But they go into Spectrier, and I'm quite pleased to see that. I think going into Spectrier there with Max Quake is a little bit unusual. My opponent perhaps expected a Volt Switch into maybe my Landorus. That would be a pretty reasonable, that would have been a pretty reasonable play to make. I Volt Switch, and then I try to max in my Lando. But my opponent now is still in a really bad spot. Again, like I said, Max Rock wasn't going to kill my Spectrier before. It wasn't going to have the opportunity. So now I just get another free Will-O-Wisp into the Regirock. I do go for the Max Electric into the Regirock as well, because since it's a +1 special defense and I've got terrain up, I want to do some damage to it, because I'm going to need that damage later on for the Landorus. I'm going to need some damage on it for Landorus because I brought my Clefairy in the back and I don't have my Registeel. But my opponent plays very brazenly with their Tapu Fini and just stays in, and so that's not good for me. That means I lose my Spectrier, and I take a good chunk of damage with Max Quake. It's not a ton of damage, thankfully. It could have been a lot worse. With that Will-O-Wisp and my natural bulk on Regieleki, I do take that pretty well. But they've got +2 special defense now. Tapu Fini's probably likely to protect this next turn. So I decided to go into my... I was debating on whether or not I wanted to go into Clefairy or Lando. I don't really want to go into Lando too early because I don't want him to max ice me. But then I realized that's exactly what I want him to do, actually. I want him to use max icing and try to take a knockout on my Landorus. Because in doing so, that would set up hail damage, and that would chip the Regirock over time, which puts it into eventual Rock Slide, or excuse me, into eventual Landorus Earthquake KO range. I also know at this point my opponent definitely doesn't have Thundurus in the back. There's no way that you don't switch into your Thundurus at this point after 2 turns. There's just no way. So I know that the Tapu Fini is a free target now. And I do need to start hitting it. It's at +2 special defense. And I can't let it get too much out of control. If it gets too many boosts, then it would be bad. I still have Electric Terrain up, though, which is very nice. Like a modest Magnet, max special attack, Thunderbolt, and do this Tapu Fini. It's still going to do a lot of damage. It doesn't do as much damage to Protect, though. And I do get the turn, like, quote, wrong. I could have attacked the Regirock and done a little bit more damage to it, but we kind of already saw the damage that I did to Regirock even at +1. Wasn't particularly impressive, so I didn't want to commit to the read. So another Max Quake goes in the Regieleki, and with my friend guard, I tanked that even better than I did the last time, so that is fantastic for me. My opponent now has +3 special defense from their Tapu Fini, which is pretty awkward. I do have Electric Terrain and Thunderbolt, of course, but that's not going to be enough to knock out the Tapu Fini. However, my opponent also doesn't really have too many options to knock me out very quickly. All of my opponent's attacks here, because they don't have Muddy Water, they have Brine. They don't have a way of damaging my Regieleki very quickly. A burned Rock Slide through Friend Guard is going to do pitiful damage. So Follow Me protects my Regieleki, and I can go for Thunderbolts into the Tapu Fini without much worry there. So like I said, Thunderbolt is going to be able to hit the Tapu Fini. Does a good chunk of damage. It's going to be in KO range of the next one. And they go for Calm Mind, and I'm like, oh, that's, not, like, if I don't KO this, it would be problematic, but it's going to be hard for them, again, to KO me. And they go for Rock Slide. Clefairy dodges, which is nice. Regieleki, like I said, takes pitiful damage from that. It just took absolutely nothing from that exchange. I'm also very confident at this point that my opponent wants to protect their Tapu Fini. I think this for a couple reasons. One, they protected their Tapu Fini every other turn that they've had the opportunity to. They keep using Protect with it to try to block the Regieleki's attacks. And two, I am pretty sure that I'm out of Electric Terrain this turn, so it makes a lot of sense for them to protect their Tapu Fini, because they would gain some advantage from that. And so, yeah, I'm just checking my turns here. I can see that I only have one turn of Electric Terrain, so I'm very confident they're going to protect their Tapu Fini. And even if they don't, it's not a huge deal, because, again, nothing really changed too much from last turn. I still have Follow Me, and they did improve their board a little bit by having a +1 on Tapu Fini with that Calm Mind, but it's not going to be significant enough to knock out the Clefairy. Regirock and Tapu Fini are not going to do enough damage, so I get the turn right here with this Thunderbolt. I didn't, strictly speaking, have to do that, but it's one of those where you just kind of know what your opponent's going to do, based on their previous plays. You just know that is the play they're going to make. And so Electric Terrain is now gone from the field. I need to go for a Helping Hand now in order to knock out the Tapu Fini, because it's gained that extra special defense boost. Don't forget that it's a +4 special defense with Light Screen. I'm going to need the Helping Hand in order to not guarantee this knockout on Tapu Fini. I won't be able to get it with just Thunderbolt alone. So I do need to go for the Helping Hand. I remember at this point I was calculating whether or not Stomping Tantrum actually knocks out Regieleki, and it doesn't with Red Guard. So I expect that's pretty likely my opponent's going to try Rock Slide again, since Stomping Tantrum wasn't a very strong move for them in the last turn. But even if they do go for the Stomping Tantrum, my Regieleki will survive the hit, and I can use it again on the subsequent turn. So my opponent does go for the Rock Slide again, and again does just very low damage to Regieleki. I am in a commanding spot. So my opponent, like I said, definitely doesn't have their Thundurus, so they've either got Torkoal or Venusaur in the back. And it is Torkoal, which somewhat makes sense. It explains why they didn't switch out their Tapu Fini before, because Torkoal was still taking a lot of damage. Now remember that this is Assault Vest Torkoal, but I'm not super confident that Assault Vest Torkoal appreciates switching in on a Electric Terrain boosted Max Lightning. But yeah, now at this point, it's so free for me. The Torkoal can't protect, so I just have an incredibly safe Thunderbolt into it. I'm going to do a lot of damage. It's not a kill, but I don't need it to die. I've got my Landers in the back, and both these Pokemon are definitely in Earthquake KO range, so I get to see Rock Slide fail to KO the Regieleki, which is very funny. If it had KO'd, it would have saved slight animation time, because then we wouldn't have to see the Torkoal go over Burning Jealousy. Yeah, one of the things I don't think we talked about too much, or I didn't talk about too much, so there's no really we here. I'm talking to you guys, but I'm not talking with you guys. One of the interesting things about this Torkoal is it holding an Assault Vest, and because it doesn't have a Trick Room component, there's no Eruption. There's also no Heat Wave, so their strongest spread fire type attack is Burning Jealousy, which is not particularly strong. And the rest of their attacks, like they've got Overheat, which is stronger than Eruption. I think Overheat is a really cool option on Torkoal because it deals a lot of single target damage, where those other options that you could use don't have that ability for you. Like you have a really strong burst option, kind of similar to like Megazord Y. And so I think it's a cool step. Like the Clear Smog as well in there, and the Body Press. They don't end up being very well suited to fight my team. I'm very happy that it's not Eruption. But even then, like without the Trick Room component, the Torkoal is just really weakened to me unless they decide to bring in Torkoal and the Venusaur. So I was taking a lot of time there, just trying to think about what I wanted to do. Not on this turn, obviously. This game is over. I just Earthquake. It doesn't really matter what I do with my Clefairy either. Just go for Follow Me in case something weird happens. Like nothing weird can happen. Could have gone for Helping Hand. Could even go for Sing if I wanted to. It literally does not matter because the Torkoal and the Regirock are definitely going to fate to Earthquake. They don't have Reflect Up. I've chipped them already. They can't do anything about that. But I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to do in Game 2. So I thought it makes... So initially, I think it's very obvious that my Spectre did really well there. My Spectre was super, super good. I thought Spectre was really strong. I figured it was pretty likely that my opponent would try to switch it up and go with Venusaur mode. I didn't think they wanted to bring the Regirock again. Regirock didn't do anything. If I was able to burn... They probably could have played a little bit better to avoid getting burned. They could have switched in different Pokemon to avoid the burn in different ways. Perhaps they could have knocked out my Regieleki before I was Dynamaxed, because then I couldn't reset the terrain, but still I don't think that would have been a very viable strategy because I still have the Landers in the back that I can max afterwards. And they're just not going to be doing very much damage to me. So I expected a adjustment here of Venusaur. I thought that made a lot of sense. And so I went with my typical anti-Venusaur lead, which is going to be... Or I'm thinking about at this point going with my anti-Venusaur lead of Spectre and Clefairy. And then I do Landorus in the back. Landorus, like I say, is still a really good max versus my opponent. I ended up maxing the Regieleki last time, but that would be pretty unusual. I wouldn't expect myself to do that again unless I felt like it. I mean, it'd be really strange to try to max my Regieleki again. But Lando looks really, really good, and I might as well just take my Lecky, so that way I can have a good option to knock out the Finny, immediately pressure it. Both Moltres and Registeel can't do that, so it doesn't really make too much sense to bring either. I could bring Moltres in this matchup, but Moltres doesn't... Like, it's okay versus, like, the Venusaur part of it, but yeah, it's not even that good versus the Venusaur part. And it's definitely not good versus Regirock or a Thundurus. Thankfully, the Thundurus, like I say, is safety goggles. It's not Life Orb or anything like that, so it's not as threatening as it could be. But yeah, I locked this in for Game 2, and Spectre or Clefairy really just shuts down Venusaur stuff. It really just annoys them. It discourages them from maxing. And so my opponent actually leads with Grimmsnarl and Torkoal. And this is really interesting for me. My opponent, by leading this, has not very much offense available to them. So I can just go for Sing. Even if I miss, it really doesn't matter. I don't need a Helping Hand. I don't need to Follow Me here, because the only thing Follow Me would really do is redirect maybe a Spirit Break. But I think it's pretty likely that my opponent wants to go for a Screen at this turn. So I can go for Snarl and Sing. My opponent can switch into their Tapu Fini if they want, sure, but I'm going to get a Snarl on their Tapu Fini, and I can get another Snarl the next turn. It's not a good look for them, so I'm able to get a nice Snarl off. Even with that Light Screen, I still do enough damage to Torkoal. I'm happy with that damage. That's good damage. And now I get to roll the RNG on Sing. Managed to hit this one, so that's good. So yeah, that's a fantastic start for me. Like I said, Clefairy had nothing better to do that turn. I can't think of something... Like, I don't know what else Clefairy was supposed to do there. And so now I'm in such a great position. I'm going to go ahead and just hard switch into my Landorus. If my opponent wants to stay in with their Torkoal, they can. But I think it's pretty unlikely they want to stay in with Torkoal here, because Torkoal's doing nothing. The best it can do is Burning Jealously for just a little bit of chip damage. That wouldn't do very much. Meanwhile, I can go into Lando. And now I have the opportunity to SD. I can go for a Helping Hand max move. They're going to be in trouble. My opponent does go for Spirit Break, hits into the what was the Spectre slot, does a little bit of damage, only 30, thanks to Friend Guard and Intimidate. I actually hit a second Sing, so that's very nice for me. That is going to be really punishing because it means the Grimmsnarl has 0 turns of sleep, and the Torkoal also doesn't wake up. So now I have the freest max move into this Torkoal. I don't want to SD here because the Torkoal has taken 2 sleep turns, and if it wakes up, it's definitely going for Burning Jealousy. So a Swords Dance would just be canceled out unless it got the maximum sleep turns. And at this point, I can just Helping Hand. My opponent didn't set up Reflect. They did go for the Spirit Break. So now I basically get a free attack into that Torkoal. So I'm going to go for the Helping Hand Max Rock here. That does a couple things. It'll knock out Torkoal if it stays in, and that will remove the Sun for the Venusaur later on. If they go hard into Venusaur, that's good for me because I'm just going to do a lot of damage. If they go into Tapu Fini, that's the worst case scenario. I'm not going to be doing a ton of damage to Tapu Fini here. But it is interesting that, again, they brought the Tapu Fini. So that means they probably, like I said, they have Venusaur in the back because that makes the most sense. Especially with this, you probably want to max your Venusaur. You're like just saving it for the late game, which I think is a pretty clever play. And so they switch into Tapu Fini, but this is still really nice. A Helping Hand Max Rock is not going to knock out that Tapu Fini, but they can't set up Reflect this turn. They're guaranteed to sleep. So this is going to do a ton of damage to the Tapu Fini. If it put it in Sandstorm K range, that'd be awesome, but it shouldn't be doing that. So get to do about 80% to the Tapu Fini. Quite happy with that. Sandstorm's going to negate its Leftovers Recovery. Because the Torkoal did switch out, that means it's going to be able to switch in later and reset the Sun, and have the option to like switch in to boost Venusaur's speed straight away. But I'm in a really dominating position here, especially because I can give myself a speed boost. I can give myself 2 speed boosts potentially. I can also just hard switch into my... Yeah, I think I remember this point. I didn't want to just stay with Clefairy because I felt like I could give something else a speed boost. And generate more advantage that way, compared to just staying with Clefairy and being like really ultra safe. So I went ahead and just switched out into my Spectre and go for Max Airstream into Grimmsnarl. This will knock out Grimmsnarl if it doesn't wake up and go for Reflect, which would be very nice. If it doesn't get up Reflect, then Lando's just going to start taking even more knockouts. Tapu Fini does go for Protect as well, so I get that turn partially right as well. I figured it was decently likely they would go for Protect the Tapu Fini. I could have punished that with like, a Helping Hand, Max Flying, or Max Quake. That would probably put it into Sandstorm KO range. Maybe not after Reflect though. But I do get free damage off on this Grimmsnarl. Not a knockout because of the Reflect, but can't complain too much. The Torkoal slept for 2 turns, and I hit 2 Sings. So yeah, I definitely can't complain about that. So my opponent does have both their screens up now, which is kind of annoying, but not the end of the world. I should be able to take a knockout on the Grimmsnarl, and should be able to take a knockout on Tapu Fini. It's going to be close. My Spectre isn't that offensive. I've only got 4 special attack EVs in it. So the Tapu Fini could survive the attack. If it does, it's not the end of the world. Because there's not much I can do about that. And I don't want to just like not attack the Grimmsnarl. I do want to kill the Grimmsnarl, not because I care about the Grimmsnarl so much. Like Grimmsnarl being there really isn't that big of a deal. It has Scary Face, and that's going to lower my Landor's speed, which isn't great. But if I do it the other way around, I'm going to get 1 knockout and not 2. So I much prefer to do it this way. So I'll go ahead and use Juice Shadow Ball on the Tapu Fini, and it lives. I'm like, oh no. The Brine does some damage to the Lander. It's not a huge amount, thankfully. And I go for Airstream into the Grimmsnarl. So, I put my Spectre at +2 speed, which is great. It means that for sure I outspeed this Venusaur. And so I'm going to be able to put off a Snarl or a Taunt on it, which is good because, again, they're going to max their Venusaur. And Sandstorm does actually take out the Tapu Fini as well, so I know they have to go into Torkoal Venusaur here. Torkoal Venusaur is what they've got in the back. I will just need to preserve my other Pokemon a little bit better. But they actually switched into their Thunderous. They sent out Thunderous, and I'm like, okay, well that makes things a little bit different. So they have Thunderous instead of Venusaur. And I am very pleased to see that for a number of reasons. One, it means they can't set up Vine Lash on me, which is going to be super nice. And two, it makes them a lot weaker to Snarl. I don't have to guess between Taunt and Snarl ever. They probably would max their Venusaur straight away, but now I don't even have to worry about that. Don't have to bother with it. It does make my Regieleki kind of useless, but not really too bad. I just need to use my Regieleki to hit the Torkoal while I have the opportunity. So I'm debating a little bit between going for Snarl and going for Will-O-Wisp. Remember, this Thunderous does have Fly, so it does have the ability to boost its speed. But that's not a huge issue at this point. If it does go for Max Fly into my Spectrier, which would do the most damage to me, I'm at +2 speed, so it's not going to be gaining that much. And I also can't imagine that it's invested that much in attack. It might not be it might be like a defense lowering nature or a special defense lowering nature, but I can't imagine they have a significant amount of EVs in their attack on this Thunderous, so Max Fly shouldn't be doing too much damage. And now I can go for Snarls into the Torkoal and Thunderous. And that's very, very important because it means they're going to be permanently dropped for the rest of the game. There's no switch outs they can make. They're going to be in trouble. A Max Steel Spike was aimed at the Landorus, hits the Regieleki, and I'm like, perfect. I can't ask for anything better than that. It means they don't have any speed boosts. It means that Regieleki will still outspeed them on the next turn. Not like they could kill my Regieleki with Max Electric. Not like they would want to. But because if they did, then they would set Electric Terrain, and that would boost my own Regieleki's Thunderbolt, which would be bad for them. So now I have a couple choices. I can, at this point, since I've Snarled the Thunderous, I think it's pretty obvious since I'm going to go for another Snarl. I may as well just go for Will-O-Wisp since they're almost certainly going to be locking in here to Max Flying. They want to get their 2 speed boosts if they can help it. And then I'll just Thunderbolt the Torkoal. And the Torkoal is guaranteed to wake up this turn because it has slept 2 turns. I do dodge, the Will-O-Wisp does miss the Thunderous, so I'm 1 for 3 on Will-O-Wisps, but I'm 2 for 2 on Sing, so I think I'll still take the Sing accuracy, especially given at this point in the game. The Snarls or the Will-O-Wisp doesn't matter too much. And they also go for another Max Steel Spike, which is interesting. And they actually go for Clear Smog as well under the Thunderous, predicting that I would go for the second Snarl. That would have reset their special attack back to neutral. But because they opted not to attack my Regieleki, which again, I don't even think they could knock me out with anything except maybe Overheat. And again, knocking out my Regieleki, like even if they knock out my Regieleki, that's not really super helpful for them. And they definitely can't knock out my Spectrier. So they're kind of in a catch-22. There's not really much they can do. And at this point, I realize they're probably not going to go for Max Airstream. Even if they do, it doesn't matter at this point. If they outspeed my Lucky, I don't care. And they can't outspeed my Spectrier. And if they already outspeed my Landorus, so I may just go for Thunderbolt into the Torkoal, do some good damage to it. Take a knockout. Max Lightning goes into the Spectrier, and that's at -1, so it does still do a good chunk of damage. And now I just have to think carefully, basically. So my opponent's light screen wears off, which is nice. It means my Spectrier's attacks are going to do a little bit more damage. Not too big of a deal, though. At this point, what I wanted to do is I wanted to set up a Clefairy and Landorus endgame. So I could just basically lock him in, go for Follow Me a bunch of times, eventually hit one of my Rock Slides. I felt like that was pretty strong. By switching in and going for Snarl as well, that's going to greatly reduce the odds that they're going to be able to break through Clefairy very quickly. And if they don't knock out my Spectrier this turn, which they don't, they decide to go for Flash Cannon, try to catch my Lando, which I think probably was a good play. You've got to count on me just giving that up. But now at this point, they cannot win because they didn't knock out my Spectrier. Now my Spectrier becomes a win condition. I can now just go for Shadow Ball into the Thunderous repeatedly, and there's nothing they can do to win this game. I don't know the bulk on this Thunderous quite yet, but I'm expecting Shadow Ball to knock it out in 2 hits from this range. And even if it doesn't, it's unlikely they're going to be able to knock out my Clefairy in 2 hits. And they just use Thunder Bolt to the Clefairy, so not even using Flash Cannon, their strongest attack. But again, it doesn't really matter. Even if they had and crit me, it doesn't matter because the Shadow Ball just knocks me out, or just knocks out the Thunder Stone the next turn. So that's my round 3. Good games to Kyle. They had an interesting team. Like I said, I was really surprised they didn't have a Trick Room component with it. It really seemed like a Trick Room component would have been really strong with that. But my opponent ended up bringing their Thundurus in game 2, trying to adjust to my Regieleki. Did bring the Venusaur in either game, so technically a Venucool win. But I didn't play against the Venusaur, which I think is the most troubling part against my team. So I feel like I lucked out a little bit in this particular matchup, but can't complain too much. Happy to move on to 3-0. I'm doing 3 times as good as I expected, or as my minimum goal was. So starting 3-0 is very nice. Can't complain one bit about that. So thanks for watching, and until next time, have a good one.